The webinar. Beautiful. Hi, everyone. Welcome in on behalf of AACRAO as well as our LGBTQI Caucus. We want to welcome you warmly into our panel discussion for today. And thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to give folks a couple minutes or a couple seconds rather, to settle your audio and video preferences, and we'll get it started. It's exciting to see some familiar faces in here. Welcome, welcome, welcome in. Alrighty, so my name is Christina. I work closely with Mike and Annetta in our webinar sections at AACRAO, and I will be your tech person today just to briefly explain how AACRAO Zoom webinar works for folks who haven't joined before. It's a bit different than meetings, and so the best way to engage with our panelists as well as with one another is using the chat function or the Q&A, and that's going to be in your drop-down menu on the very bottom of your screen. For chat, if you want to message someone specifically, you have that option, and you can also message all hosts and panelists as well as everyone. So just be mindful about which one you select. And I believe we're going to have time at the end for questions. And without further ado, I will pass the mic over to our moderator for the day, Tammy. Tammy, thank you so much for being here today.
Sure, thank you for facilitating. We really appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us today for AACRAO's LGBTQIA+ webinar. I want to say happy Pride Month, or to my fellow colleagues here in the South, happy Pride, y'all, which is what we typically shorten that to. So I'm also filling in for Chris Dorston, who is the co-chair of our caucus. Chris couldn't be with us today, but he sends his well wishes, and he was very instrumental in organizing this webinar. So we thank him for that. The format today will be a series of questions. I'll ask our panelists to, in their first response, to introduce themselves, their name and their institution if they're affiliated with one, and then to take just 1 or 2 minutes to answer the question that we have. But before we begin to follow the rules, I'm going to break that rule. In the very first question I ask, and I'm going to ask Brad Myers to respond as the first panelist to provide some history for all of us on the caucus, its inception, and its history with AACRAO. So the very first question, Brad, if you will, is a little bit about the history of the caucus, how many years you've been with the caucus, and your experiences with it.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brad Myers. I retired the first time from Ohio State at the end of 2016 as the university registrar. I went back to work for a while in the same position in 2020. So I was one of the founding members of the caucus, and that was we kind of figured out that it was 1994. It was definitely in Boston, and there was a group of us that had gotten to know each other informally. Some of the other caucuses already existed, such as the African American caucus, and so we had a pattern to be able to follow from a positive perspective of they already existed. And so what we wanted to do was to try to create an opportunity for folks to get together. And to be bluntly honest, there were a lot of people that were very concerned about being particularly visible. So we picked a time and we picked a location that wasn't really obvious. We had to publicize it enough to be able to get folks to realize to come and visit, stop in. There were several people that kind of walked by and looked in the door, but didn't necessarily come in. But anyway, so we had a great first meeting, and it provided an opportunity to build a framework of things over the year that have involved presenting sessions, either just as a separate caucus or maybe with some members from other caucuses, an opportunity to do some fundraising for local gay community kinds of groups. So maybe a kaleidoscope that's in the local community, or some kind of activity that's definitely social service related, and try to raise some either funds or some activities support kind of services related to those groups. And a lot of it, quite honestly, is to help to build a social and informal professional network. And so it was a good opportunity to be able to let other folks know within the profession that you can be successful and be gay, especially early on when people weren't as comfortable being out. and realize that there are people in administrative positions across the country that are being successful, that are being comfortable, and see that as role models. And over time, maybe that's been a little less of an issue because our culture has changed. But I do think for some individuals, depending on where they are and what type of institution, it's still a framework of support that can be very important for them. So why don't I turn it back over to Tammy?
Sorry, I was trying to chat and muted at the same time. So thank you very much for that. Before we start to talk with all of our panelists today, I want to turn the mic over to Cassandra Moore, if I could, for just a moment and allow her to share in the welcome for the group.
Welcome to all. Thank you, Brad, the founding father of the caucus, as I like to say.
I wasn't the only one.
Well, you weren't the only one, but you're the one I know the best. So good afternoon. I'm Cassandra Moore, Assistant Director of Admissions and Enrollment Development at Anne Arundel Community College and in Maryland, and your Vice President for Access and Equity on the AACRAO Board of Directors. And I want to thank Chris and Dr. Tammy Johnson for their caucus leadership and for organizing the panel discussion celebrating Pride Month. We will all benefit from the panelists' experiences as higher education professionals who have devoted their lives to the most basic of ideals. Equality, not just for some, but for all. Equality, not just for some, but for all. Equal justice under the law, the words engraved in front of the US Supreme Court building. I'm going to share the words of former President Barack Obama. This is a month we honor courageous pioneers who came out, spoke out, and challenged unjust laws and destructive prejudices. Thank you to the sung and unsung heroes and their allies. Let's acknowledge this short list of the courageous: Barbara Gittings, Bayard Rustin, Bill Thumb, Dan Savage, Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon, Evan Wolfson, Frank Kameny, Gilbert Baker, Harvey Milk, James Baldwin, Carl Heinrich Ulrichs, Larry Kramer, Marsha P. Johnson, Tammy Baldwin, Steve Endine, Tammy Conway, James Oberfeld, and John Arthur, and last but not least, our very own Brad Myers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So now I want to turn it over to all the other panelists. If we have another panelist who would like to go first, just introduce yourself. How many years you've been with the caucus and your experience, please.
Sure, I'll go first, Tammy. So my name is Peng Goldman Max, and my pronouns are he, him, they. And I am with the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I've been with the caucus for a couple of years now, but this is actually my first year being active.
I'll be glad to jump in. Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Weber, and I serve as the University Registrar at Aurora University, which is in the western suburbs of Chicago. The first caucus meeting that I attended was in 1999 and have tried to either attend the actual meetings or the other events that the caucus has had each of the years.
I can go. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Soraya Urquiza. I am the registrar for the California Institute of the Arts. I'm in my third week, so hence why it's so barren behind me here. I am the chair of the Latinx Caucus for AACRAO. I've been the chair for the Latinx Caucus for 4 years. It's a blur now. 2020 made it all a blur. But I'm a staunch ally of the LGBTQIA+ Caucus for AACRAO, so I thank you all for being here.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Dills Allen. I'm the University Registrar at California State University at Chico, and I've been a member of the caucus for a couple of years now and was so glad we were back in person so I could finally attend a caucus meeting in person here a couple of months ago.
Okay, any other panelists who haven't introduced themselves? I'll apologize up front. I'm getting a unstable connection messages here. So if I disappear, you'll know what's going on. So let's jump right into to one of our more popular questions we have whenever we have in-person meetings at conventions. If you are comfortable, if you will tell a little bit about your experience as an LGBTQIA individual, if you have a coming out story, as we would like to refer to that, or an event at your institution. It could be a past institution, current, doesn't matter, but how that was received, what that experience was. And if you're like most of us, you probably have had different experiences on different campuses, some positive and some negative. So again, 2 or 3 minutes, feel free to share what you would like to there, but as a professional in the field, what you have experienced and what advice maybe you could give to others in the field.
I'll start. Fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to characterize it, I started working full-time at the same institution that I had attended as a student for, at that point, I had been a student for 7 years, and I was still a student while I was starting to work full-time. So a lot of the folks where I started working already knew me, and they knew that I worked really hard, that I was dedicated to what I was doing. And I think that that helped. If people had some sense of concern about who I was, then the fact that they had some level of respect for me helped, and they already had some exposure. The other thing that was particularly helpful was that my direct supervisor was an out lesbian. So I started working full-time in 1980, a long time ago, and having gay role models was not nearly as common, although at a large public institution I worked at and went to school at Ohio State in Columbus, Ohio. And so it was large enough, diverse enough that some exposure was already there, but it really did make a difference that people had a lot of respect for my direct supervisor. And although she wasn't going to flaunt her sexuality, she certainly didn't hide it. And I guess I would describe my style as somewhat similar. So I was out, but not necessarily trying to be an activist or somebody that was trying to be particularly problematic from a visibility perspective or antagonistic or anything like that. I didn't see that as my role in a positive way of trying to build my own professional career in an administrative role. But I helped start the gay, lesbian, bisexual faculty staff organization at the university. I helped bring the Names Project twice to the university as one of the 2 co-chairs each time. So I was doing a lot of things on the policy development side. Unfortunately, during that time frame, AIDS started to become an issue. So I got involved in AIDS policy development at my institution, as well as AIDS education programs across campus. It was also a time that student service offices were starting across college institutions. And so that made a big difference too in terms of visibility. So turn it over to someone else.
Just a note, I'm purposely not calling on every panelist. Not every panelist may have a response for the question. So jump right in, answer the ones that you want. And when we feel like there's a pause and no other responses, we'll move on to the next question.
I think for me, I've had the opportunity to work at several different institutions over the years. And earlier in my career, I was at institutions where both I did not feel that the culture, the campus culture, was a place where I could be 100% authentic and be open with my colleagues. But that changed when I accepted an assistant director of admissions position. I was on admissions side at that time and was offered a position in Chicago at a large Catholic university where I would not have thought that my sexuality would be celebrated, but I actually was encouraged by then Director of Admissions to use my experiences and be able to encourage students who were coming from LGBTQ backgrounds to consider the university. And really from that point forward, I began to see a need, especially on the registrar side when looking at preferred or chosen name and pronouns. And so at my current university, at my most recent previous university, I was glad to be that person that students could come to. So it's changed throughout my career of how open and out and that I've been.
Yeah, my current institution is wonderful. My president is an out and proud lesbian. It's very well received on campus. When I started my process of coming out, though, I was at a Council for Christian Colleges and Universities institution. And so for those of you who are unaware, to be a member of the CCCU, you must have anti-LGBTQ plus policies. You must actively discriminate against the LGBTQ community. Eastern Mennonite and Goshen in 2015 made the decision to change their policies, and they both lost their membership because of it. So yeah, my colleagues were all wonderful and great. It was upper administration did not receive it well. So I acknowledge that there are potentially people on here who are taking a risk even by just coming to a meeting like this.
For me, I think it comes down to geography matters. Growing up in small town Midwest, coming out was totally different. I had to be more selective, more purposeful with who I came out to, just because I didn't know people and don't know how they would react. But luckily in my first registrar's office role, when I was a degree audit coordinator, I quickly learned that I wasn't the only gay, staff member. So was able to watch and gain mentorship by my first direct supervisor, and to allow me to grow into my role in the registrar's office at that time. But I think most important for me, and far as my development in this and as a higher education professional, is moving out to the DC, Maryland area, where I was really embraced for who I was. People didn't give me the weird looks like I would get elsewhere. And I was able to have impacts on policies like the chosen name policy at my second to last institution. So being embraced and being brought into the conversation, being mentored, I think were very important for me. And I really got all of that stuff. All of that really by moving and growing up professionally in the DC area. So that's my experience.
So I often joke that I was born an ally, and that's just thanks to my parents, because I grew up with a lot of aunts. I didn't know, as a kid, you're just like, oh yeah, that's my tia so-and-so, that's my tia so-and-so. It wasn't until I was in my teens that I was like, oh, wait, what do you mean we're only related to one of that? So it was so, being a member of the LGBTQ community was so normalized as growing up, which is a little bit strange or not very common in the Latino community. But the way my parents were, it was just so normalized. Granted, it was also very taboo. It was like, we don't talk about why, Tia Pancha and Tia Rebecca live together and have a son. And, we don't talk about it. That's just who they are. And then we move forward. So it had a little bit of a double-edged sword, because as I got older, I realized that wasn't the case for everybody. And it wasn't until I started working professionally that I realized that there were so many policies that were discriminating against, especially when it comes to pronouns and names. So I kind of just used just my upbringing in helping me craft, just a safe space for our students and for my fellow colleagues. But I definitely have my parents to credit for that. Yeah, and I hope that that's what's happening in our community, in our, culture now, where it's just it's part of the narrative where it's just normalized. And I hate to use that word, but that's what it was. It was like, oh, our cousin Hooven is now Joanna, and that's just how it is. Okay, great. Let's move on. So thank you.
Couple of other quick reflections. So when I moved over to the registrar's office from one of the colleges, I was moving into an associate registrar position, and the senior associate registrar that I was going to report to was a really kind of old school, nuts and bolts, literally ex-military, very social conservative guy that I was a little concerned about moving over to the office to report to him. But it turned out that we worked well together. He respected that I was a hard worker and things like that. So kind of got over that. And I'm also not naive to think that, there's probably for all of us, there's some people behind the scenes that are saying things or doing things or whatever. And I think that perhaps as we move up the administrative ladder at our institution, we get into a position where people are probably less likely to say something very overtly because we're more in a position of leadership. So I'm not naive enough to think that some of those behind the scenes kinds of activities don't exist, maybe even still, although hopefully not nearly as much as they were decades ago.
Thank you. So moving on to the next question, that's a great springboard, Brad. Knowing that some of those issues and problems and concerns do still exist, what examples do the panelists have of ways that you support your LGBTQIA students? And that was part of our original question. I'll add to that and ask about the staff in your offices or your areas as well. What have you done to support those populations yourself?
So Brad, kind of just piggybacking off of what your comments were, I've actually had an interesting, most of my professional career has been in art and design colleges. And when I was at a previous institution, in the art and design school, there was just kind of this assumption that everybody was okay with people being LGBTQ. It was like, we're an art school. We have a Keith Haring mural. Of course we're okay with being LGBT. Look at us. But it turned out that wasn't the case, right? So I actually, I practice what I call like covert acts of resistance, which I'll drop little hints of like, hey, it's okay. I'll put like a sticker, or I'll wear, my Mickey pin, my Mickey rainbow pin. So there were students that were experiencing transphobia in the classroom, and they felt safe enough to talk to. At that time, I was the assistant registrar. I mean, as far as pecking order goes, I was pretty low on the ladder, but there were these students that just felt safe in talking with me and expressing what was happening. So that prompted me to kind of just step out of my own comfort, not my comfort role, but my role as the assistant registrar, and start talking to other staff members. And we developed, I'm proud to say it's actually still going on 10 years after my departure from that institution, the very first Ally Safe Zone training for staff and faculty to protect those students, because even though it's an art school, it doesn't mean it's a safe space, especially for our trans students, which at that point in time was somehow like new for people. I, again, don't know why, but so that was one of the ways that I kind of just got involved. And I'm very happy to know that it's still alive, that program is still alive and well, and probably 10 times better than when we started it, because it was very grassroots. But that's one example.
That's great. Thank you.
I'll go. So I think one of the ways that I've been involved is really advocating for students behind the scenes. Students might not know it, but I'm behind the scenes advocating for them. And one such example is working on chosen name policies. So currently at my current institution, we're actually updating what we currently call our preferred name policy to a chosen name policy that is inclusive of gender identity, pronouns, and even giving the students the opportunity to use chosen name on the diploma. So we're working on the scenes, we're obtaining feedback from our LGBTQ community and LGBTQ staff members to make sure that we are considering all of their voices and making sure that when they come to to this institution, they feel that they have a sense of belonging, because that sense of belonging is so crucial for our not only for our students but also for our faculty and staff too. Because if they don't feel they belong, they're going to leave as soon as that moment presents itself. So I like to pitch myself as, even though as a university registrar, I'm no longer front and center like I used to be, but I just like to be known as the unknown, unsung hero behind the scenes with our students. And then I also have a safe space sticker on my window to let students know that the registrar's office is a safe space for them. So if they have questions or concerns about anything, they can just they can come talk to us, and we'll be able to assist them with whatever they need. And of course, my dissertation topic. I'm a doctoral candidate at Morgan State in Baltimore, and my dissertation topic circles around the first-gen student, the intersectionality of being a first-gen student, in particular students who are LGBTQ, and how they establish their sense of belonging on college campuses. So, and I'm hoping that this dissertation will help inform future higher education professionals on how to work and interact with LGBTQ college students. So.
Great, thank you.
So at Chico State, we were one of the first, if not the first, to allow students to input their own pronouns into the student information system and have that automatically push out to class rosters. So when an instructor pulls up their class roster, they've got their name and their pronouns as well. In addition to that, I'm on the committee that throws our Lavender graduation, which we had over 20 participants this year, super excited about. And then I'm a member of the Trans Task Force. So we have a task force on campus that specifically focuses on helping trans students, trans issues, all those sorts of things.
It was really important to me to kind of display a sense of normalcy to folks within the office. So my husband and I have been together for 38 years, and we had the whole office out to breakfast or lunch at least once, maybe twice a year. We wanted to basically say to the staff, this is normal. And certainly for other people within the community that might be in the office, they would also see that this was normal, it was okay. Somebody could be successful and still be gay, lesbian, bisexual, whatever. And that was really important to me, for folks to be able to see that sense of normalcy, and try to do the same thing from an example perspective within the division, so that if there were people in other offices, they knew that there were people that were senior level administrators within the division that they could go to if they had questions or concerns about being gay.
I think to piggyback on that, like with the being out and having the faculty staff know that I was available, it allowed me to have a faculty member bring to my attention a student who is really struggling. And we had a chance, the faculty member and I talked with that student, and I was able to really give him some ideas of accesses to resources, both on campus and in the community in Chicago. And I kept checking in on him throughout the semester and making sure that he was doing well, because when I met with the student, it was very touch and go, and I mean that literally. So it was really important for me to be able to get him connected to services at the university and in the community. It was another situation too, where a faculty member brought to my attention that a student had just been kicked out of his home. His mother was fine with him being gay, but his father was not. And he now was living on people's sofas, and he had an extremely high GPA, but this was causing him to think about dropping out of college. And so worked with the financial aid office, worked with the college that he was in because they had access to scholarship money, was able to find ways to keep him in school. And so by being visible in my role, some of the faculty and staff were not sure what to do, but they knew that I might have some ideas, and they turned to me, and then I was able to connect those students and others to people that could help them more than I could.
Thank you. Any other responses for that question? We'll move on to the next. If you could, please, for any of our panelists or all of our panelists, those of you who have participated in the caucus and have made any professional connections or have benefited from caucus membership in your professional lives, if you could share a little bit about that. We want to encourage others who might be considering joining the caucus and tell them a little bit about what the benefits are professionally for that.
If I can start, I joining the caucus in '99. I had the chance to get to know Brad and get to know Jack Miner. Many people will know him on this call, and others. And at that point, within AACRAO leadership, there were very few that were either openly gay or even gay. And so having the chance to have individuals who I could identify with, who I began to watch and move into leadership roles in AACRAO, and to mentor me along the way has really helped me. And I've had that chance to do that with others and watch them begin to move into leadership roles too. So the caucus has been so important socially, but it's that network for me that has really allowed me to connect both within AACRAO as an organization, but just within the higher ed community, specifically in the registrar's profession.
I've been working with the caucus long enough that I'll be honest, there are some folks that are literally friends for life that I got to know within the caucus and within just working with AACRAO. And that's been really kind of a treasure for me to have made some of those kinds of connections professionally and have it slide into longer term personal connections with folks and go visit where they live or whatever. And also the professional connection of being able to do some presentations together, maybe focused on diversity, but maybe it's just you met some of these folks through the caucus and found that you had some professionally oriented activities and experiences that would lend themselves to a really good session. Didn't necessarily have to do anything to do with the caucus per se. Sometimes it did, but sometimes it was just a matter of you were both registrars, you were both within enrollment services, and had some experiences that you wanted to pull together and share on a panel or whatever. And so helping to make those connections professionally through the caucus that you can apply more broadly made a big difference for me.
Thanks, Brad.
I think also just for our membership is what I've really appreciated is that we started doing recently is holding like intersectionality webinars as well as sessions, because that's always the challenge with any kind of affinity group. It's like, well, what if I'm Afro-Latina, a queer Afro-Latina, where do I go? It's like, well, no, we can all come together. So that's one thing that I've greatly appreciated in working with the caucus is just having our membership and folks understand in our professional spaces, what intersectionality is and how that informs our day-to-day lives.
Any Any other responses for that question? If not, I'm not a panelist, but I am the co-chair of the caucus, so I'll just kind of throw this out there that there are a lot of professional opportunities. If you are even on the fence about joining the caucus, and we can encourage you to do that. Professional opportunities in terms of presentations at annual meetings, in terms of authorship for articles, book chapters. I think that most of us on here have participated in those items in some way. And so it's a great way to build your resume. It's a great way to make professional connections and frankly, advance your career even beyond the caucus. But I will ask a fun question now. We've had a lot of serious questions. Chris, my co-chair, had this question there and I looked at it and I thought, I'm not sure if we want to ask that, but for our broader audience, keep that in mind. Please share, if you're willing, one of your most memorable memories of the caucus or a fun time that you had in caucus membership. So I know you guys have some. You're probably trying to find one that you can share with the whole group.
I was going to say, everyone's filtering through. Okay, we're at work. Right. So.
Well, I'm not going to give a specific one as much as kind of in general, on the more educational side, it's been great to be able to share some stories and sessions and things like that in a broader sense with AACRAO. But I'd be honest, from a purely caucus perspective, the more personal, social kinds of activities have been the most memorable for me. So oftentimes we try to pick some local establishments, either a restaurant to be able to go to one night, maybe it's a bar a couple of nights or something like that, where people can just get to know each other a little bit better than just the kind of professional connection that you're making during the day at the conference. And for me, that has provided the most fun. So I'm not going to say, here, it was 2002 and, dinner at a specific place, but more just the matter of the opportunity to be able to kind of step away from the conference activity and really get to know people on a more individual, casual, personal basis, and share dinner, share, having a drink in a bar or something like that. Those kind of things have really been a lot of fun.
And I'm going to add that you guys were you all were known as the party animals of the caucus. I've been affiliated with AACRAO a long time, and I've seen the gatherings, some of which I've attended, but then I've seen you get ready to go to the gatherings, and you all were having a very good time. Very social. Everybody looked really happy to be getting together. And I just was reflecting on some of the things I'm listening to. And I will say that in the admissions role, I've worked for the University of Maryland as well as community colleges. The most difficult time I've had is guiding someone when they are coming out to their families. And I think it was Dan that was talking about what that was like. That was a very painful, the few times I've been close enough to a student where we've gone through that together, it's been very, very painful. And just being an ally, a person who cares, and helping them look for the resources. In each case, their fathers were evangelical ministers. And they were kicked out. And we were able to find a place to stay, a safe place, and keep them in school. So Dan, what you did is to be commended. It's hard. And I don't know if you all have had to go through that with a colleague or a student, but it is really tough when one member of your family that you admire just turns their back on you and treats you as if you don't matter. It is a tough, tough road. But in each case, they got through and they're professionals, and therapy helps too.
So any other recollections of the caucus or any information you guys would like to share about the caucus for those who are thinking about joining any of our panelists? If not, and we'll have a chance, we'll come back to that. But, I just want to kind of springboard off of what Cassandra was sharing with us there, that this is Pride Month, right? It's Pride Month, and it's a time for us to kind of reflect and be visible and learn our own history and share that. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter which one of the letters you represent for the group. There's some history to learn there. And so I've been dedicated to that in the last few years, trying to learn more history around, the AIDS epidemic and things that I wasn't there for myself, and just trying to learn that. So I'm going to ask each one of our panelists, because it's Pride Month and because you have a captive audience here, how do you hope that folks would celebrate Pride Month, or what would you recommend? What would you recommend for those who want to be either more visible members of the community or allies? What would be your advice?
I really, Tammy, would piggyback off of what you were saying, and even just knowing the history of Stonewall, knowing like that was such a pivotal moment in queer history, and it's so important. And how few people know, like, it all kicked off because Judy Garland passed away. I mean, it's us. It has to involve Judy in some way, but knowing the history of Stonewall, a 3-day-long riot, all those sorts of things, we didn't get to where we are peacefully, if we're being honest, and knowing that history is important.
Absolutely.
My encouragement, particularly related to Pride, has always been to try to push your own envelope just a little bit. So maybe you're not ready to march, but just being able to show up and watch the parade, and I think is very affirming for someone who's never felt a real sense of support or connection to the community. I don't know what the estimate was for the parade in Columbus, somewhere between 15 and 20,000. So for someone who might be new within the community or coming out questioning their sexuality, to be able to just go and participate in those kinds of activities and see a sense of normalcy at some level. You certainly see the drag queens and some of the extremes as well, but that's part of the celebration. What's been interesting for me from a reflection perspective over a long period of time is how, I'm going to call it, corporatized a lot of the parades have become. So the parade in Columbus used to be short, and now it lasts 2.5 hours because of all of the corporations that, so you have the normal floats and things like that, but now you have all the corporation groups that want to be visible as part of the parade. And so it's very affirming on the one hand. Also, on a very hot Saturday or Sunday afternoon, standing there for 2.5 hours gets to be a little long, but nevertheless, so encourage people to just get out, get some of the exposure, kind of push their own envelope just a little bit to see if that helps them feel more connected and comfortable.
Thank you.
I think I'll kind of going back to Michael's point as far as knowing LGBTQ history. I think it's also really important to be cognizant and aware of the current history and what's happening in different states. I know we have colleagues from all over the United States here. I live in California, so I live in the California bubble. Speaking of corporatization of Pride, here's my Disney pin. But I know that not all of our colleagues have that privilege, right? So reaching out, being aware of the anti-LGBTQ bills that are trying to get passed right this second, getting out there and voting or being vocal against them, reaching out to your colleagues in those respective states as well. Most recently, I think it was in Idaho, there was a whole incident with the Pride, with people protesting Pride. So reaching out to colleagues in those states that, may have been impacted by this, I think is a giant step forward. And just getting out there and voting as well. And watch Pose, the Ryan Murphy series. It's a great, great series.
Thank you.
I think I would add, Cassandra mentioned a lot of names in the address that former President Obama gave. And we're not really taught LGBTQ history, just like we're not taught a lot of other things, race and ethnicity topics within this country, within our history courses. Martha P. Johnson was a new name for me up until about a year ago, and there's a Netflix documentary about her. So, and she goes back to Stonewall, and she was there. So I would encourage you to think about some of the names that Cassandra or former President Obama gave to us to think about, to delve in and read about or watch and learn more about these individuals and how they've contributed to our world.
I'm going to suggest that next year we work with the AACRAO office and have that historical piece, and then add the new courageous leaders, so that people can be relevant and they can be connected to the ones that are new. But you don't know where you're going until you know where you came from. So the history. So I put in a link of those names that I selected from. Didn't select from all of them, but those are the ones that that resonated with me, and as an ally and with friends who are fighting the good fight in Maryland. And as Max said, it's a little bit easier in Maryland than some other places. And we know where they are because they're in the news. But I did put the link into some of the names. I wanted people to have something historical to look at.
I'd just like to echo what everybody said. It's really understanding not only our past, but also our current too. I know for me, I use our current history to really inform how I approach my work as the University Registrar here, and to inform how I support my students. So I think that's so important, but it's also, I think, just as important to be authentic and true to yourself too, because for me, I wouldn't be able to carry out my work if I wasn't true and authentic. Just be myself, because I think folks respect that a lot more than if I wasn't doing that. So,
Thank you.
I think we see a number of people who ask the question, so why do we need to have pride? And learning your history and all of that kind of information for us as a community, but for other people is really important and significant. But Soraya also touched on what's going on all over the country from a kind of negative perspective. And so the importance of being able to celebrate and be visible and get the conversation going is so critical at a time where there's a lot of pushback from a lot of folks, certain individuals, certain states, but it's still pervasively out there. There's a lot of racism, there's a lot of discrimination, overt and subvert, that's still pretty rampant in our country, and it's really sad.
and just to piggyback off that, if I may, sometimes I find all the news very draining and demoralizing, but I tell myself every day, it's gonna get better, right? It may seem difficult right now, but it does eventually get a little bit better each time.
So we're about 10 minutes from the end of the webinar. We did want to allow a few minutes for any questions that folks might have. You're welcome to direct those at individual panelists or ask a general question and our panelists can jump in with answers.
Also, to that point, I just want to hop on and encourage folks to ask panelists and hosts directly. If you want to maintain privacy to the rest of the crowd, you can ask us and we will answer, or excuse me, they will answer your question anonymously.
I did post in the chat the ACLU link and it gives you a breakdown of state by state, all the bills, all the anti-LGBTQ bills that are going on are across the country. So it's an easy resource. Please share with your fellow allies.
Thank you. So as we're waiting for any questions that folks might have, if any of the panelists would like to share anything, we didn't ask a question that you have a burning desire to share today. If we didn't touch on something that you would like to share, feel free to do that now while we're hanging out for folks to ask questions if they have any.
Tammy, there is one in chat.
Okay, so I mentioned a few get-togethers, haven't seen too many events, very interested in connecting. So let me take a second to address that. That's an excellent question. Chris Dorston, who's the co-chair of the caucus, and I have talked a lot about this. And Cassandra Moore referred to this earlier as well. We're a pretty social caucus, and you know, a lot of the caucuses had the opportunity to get together virtually throughout the pandemic. And it wasn't too well received with our caucus. We didn't have a lot of participation there. Our caucus members really prefer to interact in person. They prefer to get together at the annual meetings. So most of our get-togethers take place around those annual meetings. Several, there'll be a pre-conference reception, there'll be dinners while you're there, an actual caucus meeting, and then of course the meetings that center around or that have been sponsored by our caucus. So most of the get-togethers and meetings occur at the annual meeting. We have had the virtual connections, but again, the attendance hasn't been great for those.
Our next annual meeting is in suburban Denver, and there's a couple of caucus members that are active within AACRAO, active within the caucus, and live in that area. And so they'll help serve as kind of host to help coordinate some of the activities locally or whatever. And they've already started to think about how do we get the opportunity to get the caucus engaged, an opportunity to maybe go into Denver. How do you do that if you want to go into Denver or something like that? So it helps to have some local talent.
That's right. That's right. So there's another question that we see there. How has AACRAO, how has the caucus engaged with the LGBT plus community within AACRAO and supported folks there? I'll give you my personal experience and then I'll ask our panelists to chime in as well. I know that we have convened a couple of task force over the years, over the last 10 years or so, that have centered around preferred pronouns, chosen names, and AACRAO has issued national guidance, national recommendations to folks in the fields of admissions and registrar's offices. And so we've certainly advocated in those ways. I know that we have also aimed to include this population in most of our publications. For example, Dan and I co-authored a chapter about recruiting populations of students that might have been outside the norm. And this was definitely a population that was included with a chapter dedicated to it there. But other panelists probably have other examples as well.
These are good examples, Tammy. You know, let me talk about the caucuses a little bit, and Brad, please chime in. I am pleased with how AACRAO supports the caucuses. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, as a person I've been in multiple positions, nominations, election chair. I have been the Group 5 coordinator, approving, working with all of the caucus leadership and the committee leadership in Group 5. They have bent over backwards to give the caucuses their due. Mm-hmm. We've had great leadership with the caucus. If Tammy and Chris or anyone within that caucus has an idea, it is taken seriously. I was approached during the last annual meeting about Colorado. We want a safe place where we can have a gathering where people will not be uncomfortable. Now, Chris and Tammy will be looking at that, and others who live there. I think it's Carl Einhaus and some others are looking at it. But if they say to us, we want a safe place within that where we're located, because it's kind of like the place in Orlando. It's kind of on an island, right? So if someone said to me, we want a safe place within that building, we're going to find one. And it just that, you know, from my perspective, when the caucuses have presentations, they're not counted. They're like treated like separate. So you could have a lot of other groups limited to 5 to 10 presentations, but the caucuses are treated with such reverence and respect that we do give them a lot of visibility and representation, or whatever it is that you think you need. And Tammy, thank you for the work groups and talking about the publication of recruiting underserved populations, populations that have been historically excluded. I'm very familiar with that book. So we've done that. But I also want to tell you, you talk to your caucus membership. You can talk to me if you have an idea. My job, I take it to the board. And the first thing I'm going to ask is for, you know, now those who know me was, I want a proposal. So when you write that proposal, I'm taking it to the board meeting. I report out every month what the caucuses are doing. So it goes in the record, the official record. So just know that the support is there. And if we have not thought of something we can do to support you, we will. Take a look at the web pages that they've devoted to the caucuses. And I can't say that every organization is like that, but if I were not happy with the support the caucuses received, I would be the first one to tell you and them. But they have been very, very supportive. So if there's something that you see that we're missing, don't hesitate to reach out to Tammy, Chris, or to me, and I'm gonna put my email address in there.
I'll do that as well. And I just want to echo what Cassandra was sharing there. And I will give a shout out to her before the webinar ends. She is a tireless advocate for our caucus, and maybe she does that for all the caucuses. I don't know. We kind of feel like we're her favorite. Maybe they all feel like, but there has never been anything that we've asked for that she has not wholeheartedly supported. And honestly, I mean, the biggest limiting factor for our caucus, and probably most of them, is that we all have day jobs. And so it's just finding the time to do those things. But there's never been anything that's been brought forward that hasn't been wholeheartedly supported and advocated for from AACRAO. I see one more question. Not all folks can attend in person, wondering if caucus could consider virtual hybrid sessions. So we had virtual sessions throughout the pandemic, and those were not well attended. I don't know if that's going to continue for all the caucuses. That was available for all caucuses, but
And let me say something, because I'm remiss. I'm just noticing Rosalind. Yeah, I didn't just notice. Rosalind Perry is on this call. Rosalind Perry is the current Group 5 Access and Equity Program Coordinator. And she looks at any proposal that are submitted or sessions, whether they're a workshop or whatever. She's looking at those and promoting them for the annual meeting. So you have a lot of allies. I mean, I've done it before. I did that work before. That's why I know so much about the caucuses, because of my Group 5. I was chair of student access and equity for many years. And then I was, you know, the Group 5 coordinator. And so I know a lot about the caucuses and what you all, and believe it or not, a lot of scholarship have come up from this caucus for annual meetings. Lots of scholarship. So as you think about the work you take for granted that you're doing every day, and you're solving a problem, these are sessions. And if you have trouble with, I don't want to do it by myself, we'll find somebody to do it with you. We will find someone to do it with you. Do not worry about that. If you need some help with organizing that for the for review, I will help you. I've done this for everybody. If you want to submit a session but not really know about the outcomes and don't understand, and Rosalind Perry will do the same. I'm going to leave it to Rosalind because she is the current Group 5 Access and Equity coordinator. So we will help you develop that session if you need it. Just have the idea. Have the idea.
I don't want to ask anything else. I want to turn it back over to Christina. I know that we had a hard stop at 5.
Yeah, that's right. We can keep going for a couple more minutes if you guys are open to it. Again, I want to make sure I'm respecting your time, but if y'all want to keep the door open for a couple more minutes, if there are any last minute questions, I'm happy to keep the webinar open, probably until 5:05, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. But again, thank y'all so much for being here. Thank you for your honesty and just for sharing your stories and for encouraging others to do the same.
Just, if I may, just quickly, there was a question about what AACRAO has done from the policy advocacy perspective. I also know that there have been conversations with the systems, the vendors that we all use, and especially around chosen names and pronouns. We know that our systems have not caught up to where society always has been and where we definitely need to be in 2022. But AACRAO has been having those conversations with all of the vendors that are used by admissions and registrars to help advance that aspect as well.
You know, I'll add this as well. This is a little outside the realm of our particular caucus, but I do want to say that that our caucus and all of the caucuses are very dedicated to social justice issues. And so anytime there is a national event, it doesn't matter if it has anything to do with the LGBTQI population or not, we will issue a statement from our caucus that we are in support of our colleagues and support of other caucuses. And I think that's important too. I don't think, none of us live in isolation. None of us live in a bubble. And it's important that we universally support our colleagues and others. And so we try to do that as a caucus as well. That might not have been exactly what the question was asking, but I think it's important that we always, we bring that focus back out to the big picture, and it's not just about us, it's about all of us. And that's what we try to do as a caucus as well.
I think an expansion of the pronoun question that will continue to evolve. And I know that AACRAO will certainly continue to be involved in what happens from a data analysis perspective as we have more transgender students or students who consider themselves non-binary or whatever. And so I think that that's another area, kind of expanding on just simply the pronoun that's in the system, but what happens from a data perspective. And that's a challenge to the state data systems as well as iPads and things along that line. And that conversation is growing now. And I know that AACRAO will want to take an active engagement in that conversation. And people from the caucus would certainly be well represented within that discussion as well.
And we do have a process for work groups.
Mhm.
So if it gets to the point where we need to expand on what we've done in the past, a revisit, there is a work group form we can fill out and push it up to the level so that we can get that conversation started and looking at data, and you get the full support of AACRAO with Wendy Kilgore and all the folks that are at the AACRAO office.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for these extra remarks. This is really valuable information. I also just dropped in a link to AACRAO's page where anybody who's watching now can link in. And if you're not part of our listserv, that's a really great way to stay in touch with the caucus, is to sign on to that listserv. And you can email us as well if you have any questions. And I know that several folks have put their emails in as well. So please feel free to reach out. Please know that you guys are not alone wherever you stand. And again, to our panelists, thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Have a good afternoon. Take care. Be safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy and
Thank you
Chris
all.
for
Thank you,
organizing
Dr.
this.
Tammy.
Great
Thank you,
job.
panelists.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Bye.